CO Hiran didn't knock. She walked into Imani Whitaker's classroom at 7:45 in the morning, like she owned the building, which technically her son now did, and she set a cream-colored envelope on the desk between them without a word. Inside was a cashier's check. The number had 6 figures. The memo line read, "Relocation expenses." "You will take this," Hiran said, her English precise and cold as a scalpel. "You will leave Seattle. You will not contact my son again, and you will handle your situation privately. Whatever you decide to do with the pregnancy is your business. What happens to my family is mine." Imani stared at the check. Then she looked up. "Does he know you're here?" Hiran's expression didn't move. "He doesn't need to." Imani picked up the envelope. She held it for exactly 3 seconds. Then she held it out. "Get out of my classroom. If you've ever been told your child was an inconvenience to someone else's legacy, subscribe to this channel right now, hit that like button, and drop your city and country in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels, because what Imani did next changed everything. The morning sickness had been manageable for exactly 9 days, which Imani later recognized as the universe giving her a false sense of control before pulling the floor out from under her. It hit her again on a Tuesday, 3rd week of November, while she was writing the day's reading objective on the whiteboard. Her 3rd graders were still arriving, backpacks dropping, and chairs scraping, and she had maybe 40 seconds before she needed to look like a functional adult. She set the marker down, told Marcus Chen in the front row to read quietly from his library book, and walked to the staff restroom with the measured pace of someone who was absolutely fine. She wasn't fine. She gripped the sink afterward and looked at herself in the mirror for a long time. 26 years old, single, 13 weeks pregnant by a man whose last name she didn't know, whose phone number she didn't have, who had simply ceased to exist the morning after the most memorable night of her adult life. She had replayed it more times than she wanted to admit. The education conference had been in late August, held at one of those downtown Seattle hotels where the lobby smelled like expensive candles and the bar charged $18 for a cocktail. Imani had attended on a departmental scholarship. First time she'd been away from her classroom for anything that didn't involve professional development modules she could have read in 20 minutes. She'd just been promoted to lead teacher for her grade level. It wasn't a big deal in the grand scheme of things, but it was the biggest deal in her world, and she'd allowed herself one evening of something that wasn't lesson planning. She'd sat at the bar because every table in the restaurant was full. The man sitting 2 stools down had been alone too. He wasn't doing what most men alone at hotel bars did. He wasn't scrolling his phone or making performative eye contact with the bartender. He was watching the rain against the window with the focused stillness of someone who was accustomed to silence and found it genuinely useful. He'd introduced himself as June. She'd introduced herself as Imani. Neither of them had volunteered last names. At the time, that had felt like mutual respect for the anonymity of hotel bars in strange cities. In retrospect, it should have been her first signal. He was Korean, somewhere in his mid to late 30s, with the kind of self-possession that didn't come from comment so much as from a life in which uncertainty had already been encountered, survived, and cataloged. He spoke like he chose every word deliberately and discarded 3 others before settling on the one he used. He asked questions and actually listened to the answers, which at 26, after 2 years of dating men who listened only long enough to formulate their next talking point, felt almost unreasonably attractive. They talked for 3 hours. The bar closed around them. They moved to a quieter corner of the lobby, then eventually upstairs. She didn't regret it. She'd made that decision clearly and without ambivalence, and she stood behind it even now, even with everything that followed. What she regretted was waking up to a room service receipt on the nightstand and a handwritten note that said only, "I'm sorry. You deserved better than this." She'd called the front desk. He'd checked out at 5:45 that morning. She'd tried to find him through the conference registration. There was no attendee named June listed. She'd waited 2 weeks before convincing herself he was probably traveling for work, and the note had been genuine remorse over circumstances he couldn't explain. She'd waited another 2 weeks before admitting she was late. She'd waited another week after that before buying the test. 2 pink lines. She'd sat on the bathroom floor for 40 minutes and then gotten up and made dinner because she didn't know what else to do with herself. The decision had come faster than she expected. She was keeping the baby. She had a job with health insurance, a mother 3 hours away in Tacoma who would lose her mind but would also help, and a stubbornness that her own third graders had learned early not to test. She didn't need June, whoever he was. She didn't need a ghost. She'd made peace with that. Then October arrived, and Haryun Pacific Group purchased the Whitmore Foundation, which owned the building that housed Clearwater Elementary, and everything she'd made peace with went directly out the window. The purchase itself wasn't unusual. The Whitmore Foundation had been in financial trouble for 2 years, and the school its truce administration had been braced for a sale. What no one had expected was the new owner to show particular interest in the school's operations. Most commercial real estate transactions were arm's length. You paid, you renovated, you raised the lease. Sometimes you waited out a tenant. But Haryun's representatives had requested a formal introduction between ownership and school staff, which the principal, Dr. Patricia Osei, had accepted with the diplomatic cheerfulness of a woman who understood that this lease renewal was not guaranteed. The tour was scheduled for a Wednesday morning in mid-November. Imani wore her gray blazer, the one that still buttoned, because she was 12 weeks along, and the bump was there if you looked, but not obvious if you didn't. She stood in the hallway outside her classroom with the other lead teachers and waited for the ownership group to come through. She heard them before she saw them, the low, efficient cadence of professional conversation, the soft percussion of expensive shoes. On the hallway floor, Dr. Osei's voice doing its careful hostess work. Imani was reviewing the notes she'd made about the building's structural concerns she planned to raise when the school's lease was discussed. She was not prepared. She looked up and her brain went completely offline. He was taller than she remembered. Or maybe she'd simply refused to fully reconstruct him in the months since August, kept the memory deliberately blurred, because looking at him in sharp focus now was doing something alarming to her cardiovascular system. He wore a charcoal suit and no tie and was listening to something Dr. Osei was saying with that same focused attention he'd given to a woman at a hotel bar 3 months ago. He hadn't seen her yet. Imani had approximately 4 seconds to make a decision. She straightened her blazer. She did not move. She was a lead teacher in this building, and she was not going to hide in her own classroom, and if she died of a panic attack in this hallway, then at least it would be a dignified death. He turned. Their eyes met, and CO Joon-hyuk, which was his full name, as she would learn in the next 48 hours, though she didn't know it yet, went absolutely, completely still. Dr. Ososhi said something. One of the associates beside him said something. He responded to neither of them. He just looked at Imani with an expression she couldn't fully categorize. Shock. Yes, but underneath it, something that might have been dread, and underneath that, quickly suppressed. Something that looked almost like relief. Dr. Osei was now looking between them with the practiced composure of a principal who had navigated every imaginable awkward situation and was currently filing this one into a new category. This is Ms. Whitaker, Dr. Osei said carefully. Our lead third-grade teacher, and the head of our literacy committee, Ms. Whitaker. His voice was the same, controlled, deliberate. It hit her in the chest. It's a pleasure. Mr. She didn't know his name. The sentence collapsed in her mouth. CO, he said. Seo Joon-hyuk. His eyes didn't leave her face for the entire minute and a half they stood there while Dr. Osei completed the introduction. They moved on. Imani stood in the hallway alone and breathed very carefully through her nose until the group disappeared around the corner. Then she went into her classroom, closed the door, and sat at her desk with her hands flat on the surface for a full 5 minutes. He'd been in this building. He owned this building. He had given her a note that said, "You deserved better," and checked out before sunrise, and now he owned the building where she taught 22 8-year-olds and was carrying his child, which he did not know about, and which she had not yet decided whether to tell him. Her 11 o'clock students filed in. She taught the lesson. She did not drop anything. This was, she felt, a significant personal achievement. He found her after dismissal. She'd known he would. That was the thing about Joon-hyuk, everything about him was deliberate, and the deliberate version of him would not walk out of this building without addressing what had happened in that hallway. She'd stayed at her desk sorting reading assessments because she wasn't going to be caught in the parking lot like she was running. The knock on her classroom door was quiet, professional. "Come in," she said. He came in and closed the door behind him. His associates were not with him. He was alone, and in the empty classroom, with the afternoon light going gray through the windows, he looked less like a real estate executive and more like a man who had just found out the ground beneath his feet was less solid than he'd believed. He started. Don't, Imani said. She set down the assessment she was holding. Not with an apology. I've had 3 months with the apology. Say something real. A pause. He pulled out the chair across from her desks, a small chair, and he sat in it without apparent self-consciousness, despite the fact that his knees were nearly level with his chest. Somehow that small, ridiculous detail made him seem more human than anything else he could have done. I left because my presence in your life presented a danger to you, he said. That's not an excuse. It's a fact I should have explained before I left, and I didn't, and that was wrong. Danger. She repeated the word. What kind of danger? He looked at her steadily. The kind I'm not going to minimize by calling it complicated. So call it what it is. He was quiet for a moment. Not evasive quiet, thinking quiet. Like he was sorting through what he could say and what he couldn't, and trying to find the version that was honest without being a weapon. My family runs a business that is not entirely legal, he said finally. There are people who would use anyone close to me as leverage. I met you in a hotel bar at a conference. I didn't plan what happened. And when I woke up that morning, I made a calculation that leaving was the thing that kept you safest. Imani looked at him for a long time. Did it occur to you, she said, to let me make that calculation myself? He didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was quieter. No. And I've thought about that a great deal since then. She stood up because she needed a moment where he wasn't looking directly at her face. Outside, the after-school buses were pulling out of the loop. One of her students was chasing another one across the sidewalk, and a parent was calling after them. She had made the decision months ago that she could do this alone. That decision had been real, and it had held. But standing in this room with him, with the man who had given her, the one night, she actually allowed herself to stop managing everything for 5 minutes. She was aware of something shifting in her chest. Not softening, not forgiving, just acknowledging that it was more complicated than alone could solve. She turned around. You need to know something, she said, and I need you to hear it without reacting for the first 30 seconds, because how you react is going to tell me everything I need to know about who you actually are. He straightened slightly. His expression went careful. I'm pregnant, Imani said, 13 weeks. It's yours. The silence that followed was not what she'd expected. She'd braced for denial, or for the controlled blankness of a man recalculating, or for the particular kind of stillness that meant someone was deciding which way to run. What she got was none of those things. What she got was that his entire controlled, deliberate, expensive suit exterior simply fell off him like a coat dropping from a hanger. He said nothing for a long time. His hands, resting on his knees in that small child's chair, went still in a way that was different from his usual stillness. This was the stillness of something that had just taken root. 13 weeks, he said finally. Yes. He closed his eyes. Open them. You've been handling this alone since August. Since September, technically. When I took the test, something moved across his face that she didn't have a clean name for. And you came to work every day. Yes. And you were going to. He stopped. Were you going to tell me? Before today? I didn't know how to find you, she said. And after today, I hadn't decided yet. He absorbed that. He didn't argue with it or try to minimize it. He just sat with it, with the full weight of what it meant that she'd been navigating a pregnancy for 3 months without a way to reach him. And she could see him doing the work of actually confronting that, rather than sliding past it. What do you need? He asked. The question caught her off guard. She'd been prepared for a great many responses. That was not one of them. What I need, she said slowly, is to know who you are. Not the hotel bar version. Not the apology version. Who you actually are, including the part you called not entirely legal. He nodded. Once. Like a man accepting terms. Then I'll tell you, he said. All of it. And then you'll decide what you want to do, and I will respect whatever that decision is. It took 2 more meetings, a coffee, in a quiet restaurant the following afternoon, and a longer conversation the day after that, in his car overlooking Puget Sound before she had the full picture. He had come to each meeting and answered every question she asked without deflection. Some of the answers were worse than she'd expected. Some were different. Harian Pacific Group was real, legitimate, and well documented. It was also a shell over something older and darker, the SAO organization, a Korean criminal network that had operated in the Pacific Northwest for nearly 30 years, inherited by Joon-hyuk when his older brother died 6 years ago, in circumstances that were never officially classified as what they were. He had not wanted it. That much she believed, not because he said it, which he did, flatly and without trying to make it sympathetic, but because of how he described what he'd done with it since. He had spent 6 years trying to convert illegal income to legitimate business, terminate criminal contracts, and reduce the organization's exposure. He'd done it quietly and carefully because men who announced they were leaving, that kind of structure tended to find themselves with fewer options about it shortly afterward. His rivals understood only preservation of power. His reform looked like weakness. His withdrawal looked like betrayal. He was trying to dismantle a machine that had 30 years of momentum and no interest in stopping. "How close are you?" Imani asked. They were parked facing the water, engine running for heat, her coffee going cold in the cup holder. "Closer than I was 2 years ago," he said. "Not close enough. And in the meantime, I run a corporation, manage the transition, and try not to give anyone a reason to make this worse." She looked out at the water. The sky was the color of old pewter. She put her hand on her stomach unconsciously, just the familiar weight of it. He noticed. She saw him notice. She pulled out her phone and pulled up the ultrasound image from her last appointment. She held it out to him. He took the phone and looked at the image for a long time without speaking. He turned the phone slightly, like he was trying to orient himself to what he was seeing. The grainy black and white lines that looked, to the untrained eye, like television static, but which her OB had pointed out, contained a heartbeat and a profile, and 2 distinct arms that had moved on the monitor, like the baby was doing some private exercise routine. When he finally looked up, his face had done something. She didn't think he allowed it to do, in front of most people. "Her name," Imani said quietly, "is going to be Amara." His voice, when it came, was not steady. "Amara. I picked it before I knew if I'd ever see you again," she said. "I'm keeping the name." "Yes," he said, like there was no other answer. She took the phone back and put it in her pocket. She looked at him. "You said you'd respect whatever I decide." "I meant it." "Then here is what I'm deciding right now," she said. "I'm not deciding anything permanent. Not today. I'm going to need time to figure out what makes sense for her for Amara, and that is the only thing that matters. Not what's convenient for your transition plan. Not what's safest for the organization. Not what looks right to your family. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" "I understand." "Good." She reached for her coffee, realized it was cold, set it back down. "And I want to know when things change. Danger-wise. I want to know before it affects me, not after. I'll tell you." She looked at him for a long moment. "I don't know if I trust you yet," she said. "I want to be clear about that." "That's fair," he said. "But I believe you're telling me the truth right now. And that's somewhere to start." She watched his jaw work slightly. "It's more than I expected," he said quietly. She picked up her bag. "Don't make me regret it." The black SUV appeared outside her apartment building. For the first time 3 days later. She didn't notice it immediately. She noticed it on the second day, because it was the same vehicle both times, same parking spot, and when she came home from a grocery run on the third morning, it was there before she'd left. She called Joon-hyuk. "Are those yours?" she asked when he picked up. A brief pause. "Yes, I didn't agree to surveillance." "It's not surveillance," he said. "It's protection. Something shifted in the last 72 hours that I'm still evaluating. I should have told you before placing them." "Yes," she said. "You should have. I'm sorry." "Stop apologizing and start explaining," Imani said. "What shifted?" Another pause, shorter this time, like he'd already made the decision to tell her. "Someone in my organization is passing information about my transition timeline to outside parties. I don't know who yet. When that kind of information moves, the parties receiving it start making contingency plans. I'd rather have someone outside your building while I find the source." She stood in her kitchen, holding the phone, and thought about what it meant to have a car full of men positioned outside her building. Because the father of her baby had inherited a crime empire, and someone was leaking his retirement plans to people who didn't want him to retire. "How long?" she asked. "A few weeks. Maybe less. And you'll tell me if it gets worse." "Immediately," he said. She believed him. She didn't like it. She believed him. She was starting to understand that believing him and liking the situation were going to be two separate things for the foreseeable future, and she'd better make her peace with that gap. That evening, her phone rang again. Unknown number. She answered on instinct. Ms. Whitaker. The woman's voice was Korean accented, formal, and carried the particular precision of someone who had chosen every word before dialing. My name is C.O. Hiran. I believe you know my son. Imani sat down. I do, she said carefully. I would like to meet with you privately, not through him. I think you'll agree, this is a conversation that should happen without intermediaries. Imani looked out her window at the street below, where the black SUV was presumably still parked. I'll think about it, she said. Of course, Hirans said. But please don't think too long. The situation is moving faster than my son appreciates. She hung up. Imani set her phone down on the kitchen table and put her head in her hands for a moment not to spare. Just the brief private luxury of acknowledging that her life had become genuinely complicated in a way that no lesson plan in the world had prepared her for. Then she sat up, put her hands flat on the table, breathed. She had a doctor's appointment in the morning. She had 22 kids who needed a functional teacher on Wednesday. She had a man who was trying, however imperfectly, to tell her the truth, who had just called her directly, and a black SUV outside her building, and a baby named Amara, who wasn't born yet and was already the most important thing in the room. She got up and made dinner. Whatever Hiran wanted to say, she'd hear it, but on her own terms, in her own time, with clear eyes. Because Imani Whitaker had been doing hard things alone since long before a hotel bar in August, and she had not broken yet. She did not intend to start now. The meeting with Hiran happened on a Friday morning, before school. Imani had chosen the location herself, a small Vietnamese bakery on Beacon Hill that opened at 6, run by an older couple who kept the radio on low and minded their business. Not a restaurant with white tablecloths. Not a hotel lobby. Somewhere Imani knew and Hiran didn't, which was a small thing, but small things were the only kind of leverage she currently had. She arrived 8 minutes early. She ordered coffee and a banh mi and sat facing the door. Hiran arrived exactly on time, which told Imani something. She was in her early 60s, slight, with silver-streaked hair pulled back precisely, and a wool coat that cost more than Imani's monthly rent. She moved through the bakery like a woman who had spent decades learning how to enter rooms without appearing to take inventory of them, which meant she was absolutely taking inventory. She sat across from Imani and folded her hands on the table and did not order anything. "Thank you for meeting me," she said. "You said it was urgent," Imani said. "I'm listening." Hiran looked at her for a moment, not unkindly, but with the assessing directness of a woman who had survived too much to waste time on courtesy that wasn't earned. "How far along are you?" she asked. Imani's jaw tightened. "He told you." "I have my own sources," Hiran said. "He doesn't know I'm here. I want to be clear about that." "So you went around your son to come talk to the woman carrying his child?" "Yes." Imani picked up her coffee. "Go ahead." Hiran unclasped her hands and set them flat on the table. The gesture was deliberate open palms, no concealment, and Imani recognized it for what it was. A performance of honesty from a woman who had probably learned to perform it so well it was indistinguishable from the real thing. "My son believes he can dismantle the organization cleanly," Hiran said. "He believes this because he is intelligent, and because he is more disciplined than his father was, and because he has not yet been wrong in a way that cost him something he could not recover from. He is also, in this specific matter, incorrect." "Incorrect how?" "The men around him are not loyal to his vision," Hiran said. "They are loyal to the structure, to the income, to the network that has existed for 30 years and which provides certain people with things they are not willing to give up because Joon-hyuk has developed a conscience." She paused. "There is someone inside his organization feeding information to Baek Do-won. Not just about the transition timeline, about you." The coffee cup stopped halfway to Imani's mouth. "They know about the pregnancy," Hiran continued. "Do-won knows, and Do-won is not a man who ignores leverage." The bakery radio was playing something soft and instrumental. The older man behind the counter was slicing bread. Everything was ordinary and immediate, and Imani was sitting across from a woman who had just told her that her unborn child was already a variable in a criminal power calculation. "Why are you telling me this, instead of him?" Imani asked. "Because Joon-hyuk will manage it," Hiran said. He will put more men outside your building and he will accelerate his investigation. And he will tell you it is under control, and he will believe that because he is trying very hard to be the kind of man who can control these things. She met Imani's eyes, and because he is in love with you, which means his judgment is compromised in a way that mine is not. Imani set the cup down. He's not in love with me. We spent one night together. He has spent 11 weeks trying to locate you, Hiran said, without inflection. He found you 3 days before the tour. He didn't know how to approach you, so he waited for the scheduled visit. A brief pause. I'm telling you this not because I want you to feel something about it. I'm telling you because you should understand the full picture of what you're dealing with. Imani absorbed that. She made herself absorb it slowly, the way she'd learned to take difficult information from a parent conference or a district evaluation receive it. Don't react to the whole thing at once. Find the piece you can actually work with. What do you want from me? Imani asked. Hiran reached into her coat and set the envelope on the table. Imani looked at it. She didn't touch it. How much? She asked. Enough to start over somewhere else. Quietly. With good care for you and the child. And if I take it, you leave Seattle. You don't contact him. You handle the pregnancy privately, however you choose. And Joon-hyuk is no longer distracted by a situation that will get you both hurt. Imani looked at the envelope for a long time. Then she looked at Hiran. You love him, Imani said. Something shifted in the older woman's face. Just briefly. He is my son, and you think I'm going to get him killed. I think you are going to give his enemies the one thing they have been waiting for, Hiran said. Something he values more than the organization, more than his own life, possibly, which means something they can use. Imani picked up the envelope. She held it, felt the weight of it. She thought about her apartment and the black SUV and her kids in room 14 and the ultrasound picture on her fridge and the conversation in his car where he'd said immediately when she asked if he'd warn her. She held the envelope out. Get out of my classroom, she said quietly. They weren't in her classroom, but the words felt right. I mean that respectfully. Take this with you. Hiran didn't move for a moment. Then she took the envelope back with both hands, precisely, and stood. You're not what I expected, she said. I'm going to take that as a compliment, Imani said. It was, Hiran said, and then she left. Imani sat alone in the bakery for another 12 minutes. She ate the rest of her banh mi because she was 13 weeks pregnant and she needed to eat, and because she wasn't going to let CO Hiran ruin her breakfast. Then she paid her bill, thanked the woman behind the counter, and drove to school. She told Joon-hyuk that evening. She called him and said, plainly, your mother came to see me this morning. She offered me money to disappear. I told her no. I'm telling you now because I said I expected full information, and this is full information. The silence on his end lasted long enough that she could hear him breathing. Where, he said finally. The word came out clipped, controlled on the surface with something much less controlled moving underneath it. Beacon Hill Bakery. She chose the phone method. I chose the location. She didn't, he stopped. Started again. She didn't tell me she knew. I figured. She said she had her own sources. Another pause. Are you all right? I'm fine, Imani said. But she told me something you need to hear too. She said Duan knows about the pregnancy, that there's someone inside feeding him information about me specifically, not just the transition. The silence that followed was a different kind. Colder. I know, he said. That stopped her. You know, I've known there's a leak for 3 weeks. I didn't know the scope had reached you until this morning. I was going to tell you tonight. Was going to, she repeated. Imani, you said immediately, she said. Her voice stayed level. She was proud of that. You said if something changed, immediately. You knew 3 weeks ago. I was managing it. That's not what we agreed to. No, he said, it's not. She sat down on her couch. She pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of her nose. I need you to understand something. I am not asking you to include me in the management of your criminal enterprise. I am asking you to keep the promise you made to me about information that affects my safety and my child's safety. Those are 2 different things, and I need you to see the difference. I see it, he said, quietly. I should have told you. Yes, I'm sorry. She let the silence sit for a moment. Not as punishment, just as space for the apology to actually land, rather than bouncing off the surface of the next thing. Fix the leak, she said finally. And when you know more about what Do One knows, you call me. Not after you've managed it, when you know. All right, he said. Good night, Joon-hyuk. She hung up and sat in the quiet of her apartment, with her hand on her stomach, and thought about Hiran's phrase, something he values more than his own life, and what it meant that a woman trying to pay her to disappear had inadvertently told her. Something that made her feel, against all reasonable judgment, less alone. She didn't examine that too carefully. Not tonight. The leak inside the SEO organization had a name within another week, though not the one anyone expected. His name was Park Sung-min, and he had been with Joon-hyuk for 4 years, since before the serious dismantling had begun. He was 32, second-tier operations, reliable enough to have been trusted with logistical coordination during the transition. Nobody's first suspicion, not flashy, not resentful, at least not visibly. Joon-hyuk found out on a Wednesday. He told Imani that evening, as promised. "It's handled," he said. "Handled how?" she asked. Because that phrase had a wide range of meanings depending on who was using it. He's been removed from the organization and is currently cooperating with an attorney to negotiate terms for his own protection, Joon-hyuk said. He had family in Korea that Do-won was using as leverage. He didn't do this voluntarily. Imani was quiet for a moment. That she stopped. "That's actually a more complicated situation than I expected. Most of them are. Is his family safe?" A pause. "They're being relocated." She didn't ask how. Some questions she was learning had answers she wasn't equipped to evaluate, and asking them didn't help either of them. "Does Do-won know you found him?" she asked. "He will soon," which means the calculation changes. How? It means Do-won loses his inside channel and moves to direct pressure instead. He's been patient because he had information. Without it, he'll stop being patient. Imani thought about that. Outside her window, the November rain was coming down steadily, the kind of Seattle rain that wasn't dramatic, just constant, the baseline condition of the city, from October through April. "Are you increasing security?" she asked. "I'm moving you," he said. She sat up straighter. "Excuse me?" "Not permanently, as a precaution. My building has security that your apartment complex doesn't. The penthouse floor is controlled access, monitored externally and internally, and there's a security team on site. I have a guest apartment on the same floor." "I'm not moving in with you," Imani said. "The guest apartment," he repeated carefully. "Separate unit. You'd have your own space. You're asking me to move into your building. I'm asking you to be somewhere that is physically defensible while I handle a man who now knows who you are and has no inside information to keep him patient." His voice had stayed, even throughout, but there was something pressed thin underneath it. "I'm asking, Imani. Not requiring. You can say no." She pulled her knees to her chest on the couch. She thought about the black SUV. She thought about Hiran saying, "The next attack won't avoid innocent casualties." No, that wasn't Hiran. That was later. She was getting ahead of herself. She thought about her kids in room 14 and what it would mean if whatever was circling her world got close to that building. "For how long?" she asked. "Until Do-won makes his move and we can contain it. A few weeks, possibly longer. I need to keep teaching." "I know. And I'm not putting my kids at risk. If my presence in that school becomes a security problem, I take leave. That's my call to make, not yours." "Agreed. And the guest apartment has its own entrance." "It does." She rubbed her eyes. She was 15 weeks pregnant and tired in the specific way that pregnancy fatigue produced, which was different from regular tired because it didn't respond to coffee and had no respect for scheduling. "Fine," she said. 2 weeks and we reassess." She moved on a Saturday. She brought 2 suitcases and her school bag and a box of books and the framed ultrasound from her fridge. The penthouse floor was everything she'd expected from the man who ran Haryun Pacific Clean Lines, city views, the particular hush of a building with good insulation and serious security. The guest apartment was smaller than her own place, but not by much, and someone had stocked the refrigerator, which she noticed and chose not to comment on. Joon-hyuk helped carry the box of books. He didn't try to make conversation about the move or frame it as anything other than what it was. She appreciated that more than she would have admitted. "The kitchen is shared between the units if you want it," he said, setting the box down. "Otherwise, the guest kitchen is fully equipped." "I'll use my own," she said. He nodded. "The number for the building security desk is on the counter. They know your face. You don't need to check in, but they'll respond if you call." "Okay." He turned to go. "Joon-hyuk." He stopped. "Your mother was right about one thing," Imani said. "Not the money part. But she was right. That you've been trying to manage this, so I don't have to see how bad it might get. And I need you to stop that." He turned back. His expression was difficult to read in the particular way. His expressions often were not blank, but layered, like there were 3 or 4 things happening behind his eyes, and only one of them was getting permission to be visible. "If it gets bad," she said, "I can handle knowing. I cannot handle being managed." "I know," he said. "Do you?" "A beat. I'm learning," he said. And that answer, not confident, not reassuring, just honest, was the right one. She met his father for the first time the following Tuesday. Seo Mujin came to the penthouse floor unannounced, which apparently was a thing he did, and which apparently drove Joon-hyuk to a specific kind of controlled irritation that expressed itself as a jaw muscle and a very precise way of setting down whatever he was holding. Mujin was 71, built like a man who had once been physically formidable and carried the memory of it in his posture. He walked with a cane, recent, she guessed, from the way he held it, and had the kind of face that had settled into its lines over decades of hard use. He looked at Imani with the frank appraisal of a man who had no particular interest in softening himself. "So," he said, in English that carried the weight of Korean underneath it, "you're the teacher." "I'm Imani Whitaker," she said. "Yes. You're carrying my grandchild." "I am." He looked at her belly. She was just beginning to show properly, the bump definitive now if you were looking, and then back at her face. Whatever he was calculating, he kept it private. "Are you afraid?" he asked. "Of you?" she said. "Of any of this?" She thought about it honestly, because he seemed like a man who would notice a diplomatic answer. "I'm concerned," she said. "Fear is something I deal with by doing the next thing. Right now, the next thing is making sure my students have their reading assessment next week, and that I find a good OB who takes my insurance, and that whoever is threatening this family understands I'm not a pressure point that's going to work the way they think it will." Mujin looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Joon-hyuk. "She's direct," he said, in a tone that wasn't quite approval, but was in the neighborhood of it. "Yes," Joon-hyuk said flatly. "She is." Mujin turned back to Imani. "I want to tell you something. Not as a negotiation. Just as a fact." He settled his weight on the cane. "I built something I'm not proud of. Joon-hyuk has been trying to end it. I didn't always make that easy for him, and I should have." He paused. "You have the right to know that I support what he's doing. Whatever that's worth." Imani held his gaze. "It's worth something," she said carefully. "I'm still figuring out how much." He made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Fair." He stayed for 20 minutes and left without ceremony. Joon-hyuk walked him out and came back to find Imani sitting on the guest apartment couch, with her shoes off and her feet up, eating crackers from the box she kept in her bag for the nausea. "Well," she said. "He liked you," Joon-hyuk said. "He evaluated me," she said. "That's different. With him, they're the same thing." She offered him the cracker box. He sat down across from her and took one, which surprised her, and ate it without comment, which surprised her more. They sat in something that was not quite silence and not quite comfortable, but was at least honest for a few minutes. "Tell me about Do-won," she said. He looked at her. "You said he's going to stop being patient. I want to know what that looks like. Not the managed version. The real one." Joon-hyuk set down his cracker. He leaned forward, with his elbows on his knees, and looked at the middle distance for a moment, and she watched him make the decision to stop protecting her from it. "Baek Do-won runs the second-largest Korean syndicate in the Pacific Northwest," he said. "He built it by being patient and opportunistic, and by letting other organizations take the risks while he absorbed their customers when they fell. He's never directly confrontational when an indirect approach is available." He paused. "He's shifting to direct because I've closed off his indirect options. When he moves, he'll move at something visible, something that makes a point rather than just a problem." "Visible like what?" "A business, a property, something connected to me that he can damage publicly enough to demonstrate that my withdrawal has consequences." "Or someone," Imani said. He met her eyes. "I'm trying to make sure the answer is not someone, but it might be." "Yes," he said. "It might be." The fire alarm at Clearwater Elementary went off on a Thursday afternoon at 2:17 during Imani's reading block. She heard it and felt the cold, particular clarity that teachers develop after enough drills. This is a drill, or this is not. And the smoke threading under the hallway door from the direction of the administrative wing was definitively not. She was on her feet before the alarm finished its first cycle. Line up, right now, quietly. Marcus, leave the book. Jalen, I need you at the back. Let's go. 22 eight-year-olds moved with the disciplined anxiety of children who understood that their teacher's calm voice meant everything was fine, and the speed of her instructions meant they needed to move. She got them out of the room and into the evacuation line and down the exterior stairs and across the field to the designated assembly area in 4 minutes, which was 30 seconds faster than any drill. Standing on the wet grass, counting heads 1 through 22, all present, Kezia was crying but walking. Marcus was holding Jalen's hand, which was unusual, and she noted it for later. Imani looked back at the school building and saw the smoke coming from the administrative wing windows and felt the cold understanding of what this was. Not an accident. Too contained, too specific. The fire department arrived in 7 minutes. The administrative wing had a small contained fire, already partially suppressed by the sprinkler system, and damage was limited to 2 offices and a storage room. On the exterior wall of the administrative wing, visible from the assembly area, someone had painted 6 Korean characters in red paint, large enough to read from across the field. Imani didn't read Korean. She photographed it with her phone and sent it to Joon-hyuk while the fire chief was still briefing Dr. Osai. His response came back in 40 seconds. Get somewhere safe. I'm coming. Her second message was, tell me what it says first. His response took longer. Then it says the debt comes due. She stood on the wet November grass with her 22 students gathered around her and looked at the red characters on the wall of her school and understood, with the specific clarity of a person whose patience with being a pressure point had reached its exact limit, that she needed to make a decision. She made it before Joon-hyuk arrived. She called Dr. Osai aside. While the students were being collected by parents, the district had issued an early dismissal and told her plainly that she needed to take a temporary leave of absence, effective immediately, because her continued presence in the building represented a security risk she was not willing to impose on the students and staff. Dr. Osai looked at her for a long, careful moment. She was a composed woman, Patricia Osai, built for the specific endurance required by school leadership, and she didn't fill the silence with noise. Is this connected to the building's new ownership? She asked. Indirectly, Imani said. I'm handling it. But until it's handled, I can't be here. Your position is protected, Dr. Osai said. I'll classify it as a medical leave. Your students will have a long-term sub. A pause. Imani. I'm working on it, Imani said. It wasn't a lie. It was just the truest answer she had. Joon-hyuk was in the school parking lot when she got there, which meant he'd driven extremely fast from wherever he'd been. He was out of the car before it fully stopped and crossing the wet asphalt toward her, and she could see for the first time since she'd known him that the controlled exterior wasn't fully functional. I'm fine, she said. The kids are fine. Everyone is fine. He looked at her with an intensity that wasn't about the question he'd just asked. He did this to make a point, she said. I know that. You know that. So let's skip the part where you tell me it's under control, because it's clearly not, and get to the part where you tell me what you're going to do about it. He was quiet for a moment. Around them, parents and teachers were moving through the parking lot. He stepped closer, so the conversation stayed between them. I'm calling a summit, he said. All remaining faction heads. I'm going to end this at the table before it gets worse. And if it doesn't end at the table, his jaw tightened, then it ends another way. What does that mean? It means I've spent 6 years trying to do this without becoming what they expect me to be, he said. And I'm running out of ways to avoid it, if they won't take the exit I'm offering. She looked at him. At the strain around his eyes, the set of his shoulders, the way he was holding himself with the particular rigidity of a man who had not slept in 2 days and was making very careful decisions about which emotions were getting access to his face. Joon-hyuk, she said. I know, he said. Do you? Because what I'm hearing is that you're considering going back to something you've spent 6 years trying to leave, and I need you to be very clear with me about what that means. It means I protect my family, he said. The word family came out with a weight that surprised them both. He didn't walk it back. He stood in it. She looked at him for a long moment in the gray afternoon with the smoke smell still faint in the air and the red characters drying on the wall of her school behind them. Then call the summit, she said. Try the table first. And whatever happens at that table, you come back and tell me. I will. And Joon-hyuk? She held his gaze. Whatever happens there, you come back. Something moved across his face. Not relief. Deeper than that. Before our daughter is born, he said quietly, this ends. He meant it. She could see that. The problem with promises made by men in the middle of wars they hadn't finished was that meaning them and keeping them were two separate things, and the distance between them could be measured in a great many ways. She knew that. She got in the car. He watched her go, standing in the parking lot of the school his company owned, with the red characters on the wall behind him and the weight of a summit he hadn't yet called pressing down on him, and made the call that would bring Baek Do-won to the same room as him for the first and final time. What he didn't know, what neither of them knew yet, was that Do-won had already made his own call, and that the summit Joon-hyuk was arranging was not going to end at the table. The summit was set for a Thursday night, 3 days after the fire. Joon-hyuk chose the location himself, a private dining room on the 14th floor of a Haryun-owned property in Sodu, a building with 2 exits, monitored stairwells, and security personnel he trusted, which at this point was a shorter list than it had been 6 months ago. He sent the invitation through intermediaries to each faction head personally. 4 organizations, 1 table, 1 conversation about how the next chapter of Pacific Northwest criminal structure was going to look without the CO organization inside it. Do-won accepted within 2 hours. That speed should have told him something. Imani spent those 3 days in the penthouse guest apartment doing the things that kept her functional. Lesson prep she wouldn't immediately use, prenatal vitamins, video calls with her mother in Tacoma that required careful editing of the full situation, and a significant amount of lying on her side watching the Seattle skyline go gray and dark and gray again, while thinking about the red characters on the wall of her school, and what it meant that a man she'd never met had made her unborn daughter into a strategic asset. She was 17 weeks along. The baby moved sometimes now, not kicks yet, more like the flutter of something small shifting its weight, testing the space it had been given. It happened at odd moments. During a phone call with Dr. Osi as out subplacement, while she was eating toast at midnight because sleep had become a negotiation. She was lying in the dark thinking about Joon-hyuk and what another way had meant when he'd said it in the parking lot. She didn't ask him again. She could see him managing the distance between what he was preparing for and what he was willing to say out loud, and she made the calculated decision to let him have that distance for 3 days, because she needed him focused and she needed him alive. And those 2 things were currently the same requirement. He came to the guest apartment the night before the summit. He didn't pretend it was about anything practical. He knocked. She opened the door, and he stood in the hallway looking like a man who had already run through every contingency and found most of them inadequate. Sit down, she said, and stepped back to let him in. Sat on the couch. She made tea she didn't particularly want because having something to do with her hands felt necessary. She brought 2 cups and sat across from him and waited. If something goes wrong tomorrow night, he started. Stop, she said. I need you to... I said stop. She set down her cup. You're not going to sit in my living room and give me the contingency speech. You're going to come back tomorrow, and we're going to have a different conversation. That's what's happening. He looked at her. He was tired, not just sleep tired, but the kind of tired that accumulated from years of maintaining a controlled exterior over something that never actually stopped moving. I have an attorney, he said, separate from Haryun's corporate counsel. Her name is Kim Ji-yeon. She's based in Portland, and she has documents that protect your position and Amara's position, regardless of what happens to me. The contact information is in an envelope on your kitchen counter. I put it there this afternoon. Imani was quiet for a moment. You went in my kitchen to put the envelope on the counter. I'm sorry, I should have asked. She looked at her tea. When did you talk to an attorney? 3 weeks ago. Before or after you found out about the leak? Before, he said. I've been planning for contingencies since you told me about the pregnancy. This isn't new. She sat with that. He had spent 3 weeks arranging legal protection for her and their daughter without mentioning it, which was both the kind of thing that made her want to be angry at him for managing again, and the kind of thing that made that anger difficult to sustain. Thank you, she said finally. Not warmly, but she meant it. He nodded. Come back tomorrow, she said. That's the plan, he said. He left at 10. She sat with the 2 half-finished cups of tea and the envelope on her kitchen counter and the small flutter of movement in her belly and did not sleep until after 2. The summit began at 8 the following evening. Imani knew this because Joon-hyuk texted her at 8:03. Starting now. She texted back, I'll be awake. At 8:47 he texted, going as expected. Do-won is listening. At 9:22 nothing. At 9:50 nothing. At 10:15 she got up and made herself another cup of tea she didn't want, and stood at the floor-to-ceiling window, looking at the city lights, and thought about the word expected and what it meant. That she hadn't heard from him in 53 minutes. At 10:28 her phone rang. It was not Joon-hyuk's number. It was Hiran. Imani answered before the second ring. What happened? Hiran's voice on the other end was the flattest Imani had heard it, which was the most frightening thing about it, because Hiran's voice was always controlled, and this was something different, control stripped down to its bones. Everything unnecessary removed, because there wasn't capacity for it. He's been shot, she said. They're taking him to Harborview. You need to come. Imani was already moving. She didn't remember putting on her coat. She remembered her keys in her hand, and the elevator, and the lobby security desk, where the night guard said something she didn't process, and then the car, the cold air, and the 15-minute drive to Harborview that she made in 9 minutes and could not have reconstructed afterward if asked. Hiran was in the surgical waiting area when Imani arrived, standing rather than sitting, her coat still on, her hands folded in front of her at a precision that looked like the only thing keeping her upright. Moojin was in a chair nearby, his cane across his knees, and for the first time he looked exactly his age. What happened? Imani said. Do-won's men were outside, Hiran said. When the meeting ended, when Joon-hyuk announced the final terms, Do-won walked out. His men were waiting in the parking structure. How many? 3. 2 of ours got between them. Joon-hyuk took a bullet in the shoulder before they could stop it. Hiran's voice stayed flat. He was conscious when the ambulance arrived. He told them to call me. He told them. She stopped. The flatness cracked for exactly 1 second. Then it sealed back. He told them to call you. Imani sat down in the nearest chair because her legs had completed their function and were not offering to continue. She sat in that waiting room for 4 hours and 11 minutes. She didn't call her mother. She wasn't ready to say it out loud to someone who would panic. And panic wasn't a thing she had room for right now. She sat with Hiran and Moojin in the particular silence of a hospital waiting room at 2 in the morning, which was a silence with its own specific texture, fluorescent light, and distant PA announcements, and the sound of other people's emergencies moving past in the corridor, and the 3 of them saying nothing because there was nothing to say that would change what was happening behind the surgical doors. Moojin spoke once, around midnight. He said in Korean first and then in English, like he needed to say it in both languages for it to be fully real. This is what I built. This is what it does. Neither Imani nor Hiran answered him. He wasn't asking for an answer. At 2:14, the surgeon came out. Shoulder wound, severe blood loss, no vital organs. He was stable. Hiran sat down, Moojin closed his eyes. Imani put her hand flat on her sternum and breathed until her heartbeat found something closer to a normal rhythm, which took longer than she expected. She saw him at 3:45 briefly through the ICU window because they weren't admitting visitors yet. He was conscious barely, sedated enough to keep him still, but his eyes tracked to her when she appeared at the window and stayed there. She put her hand on the glass. He didn't have the mobility to move, but his expression did something she could read even through the sedation and the distance. She pressed her palm flat on the glass and left it there for 30 seconds. Then she stepped back. She drove back to the penthouse at 4 in the morning. She did not sleep. She lay on her back in the dark, with her hand on her stomach, and the city, lights coming through the curtains, and thought, with the careful, precise attention of a person who has had a genuine near-miss and survived it, about what came next. Because here was the thing she understood. Lying in that bed at 4 in the morning, 17 weeks pregnant with a man's child, while he was in a hospital with a bullet wound, the summit had failed. The table hadn't worked. Do-won had sat across from Joon-hyuk for 2 hours, and listened to the terms and walked out and had men waiting in a parking structure, which meant he hadn't come to negotiate. He'd come to assess. He'd wanted to see Joon-hyuk's face when he announced his terms, and he'd used the walkout as cover, and the men in the parking structure had been there before the meeting started, which meant this wasn't impulsive. This was planned, which meant Do-won had decided the answer to Joon-hyuk's withdrawal was elimination, and he'd made that decision before he accepted the summit invitation. and which meant the next move, whatever it was, would not be at a table. She was still turning this over when her phone buzzed at 6:45, with a text from a number she didn't recognize. Ms. Whitaker, you don't know me. My name is Agent Sandra Cho, FBI Seattle Field Office. I'd like to speak with you at your earliest convenience about Baek Do-won and the CO organization. This is not a subpoena, I'm asking. Imani stared at the text for a long time. Then she typed, "How did you get this number?" The response came back in under a minute. "I've been watching this situation for 8 months. I got your number from a source inside Harrion Pacific who is cooperating with our investigation. I want to talk before this gets worse. I think you want that too." Imani set the phone face down on the mattress and stared at the ceiling. 8 months. An FBI investigation that had been running for 8 months, which meant it had started before the summit, before the school fire, before Imani had moved into this building, possibly before she had walked into a hotel bar in August. A source inside Harrion Pacific who was cooperating, which meant someone in Joon-hyuk's organization was talking to federal agents, which was different from the leak to Do-won, or possibly overlapping with it, and she didn't have enough information yet to know which. She picked the phone back up. When and where, she typed. She told Joon-hyuk that afternoon, from the hospital, sitting in the chair beside his bed while he was awake enough to track the conversation. His color was bad, and the IV line in his arm was doing several things at once, and he looked, for the first time since she'd known him, genuinely reduced, not diminished, but stripped of the surface layer that usually stood between him and the world. "FBI," he said. "Agent Sandra Cho." She said 8 months. He was quiet. His eyes moved to the window, the particular look of someone whose brain is running faster than their body can currently support. "Did she say who the source was?" he asked. "No." His jaw worked slightly. "Do you know what she wants?" "She wants to talk." She said, "It's not a subpoena." "It's never a subpoena until it is," he said. It wasn't bitter, just factual, the tone of a man who had navigated legal exposure before. "What do you want to do?" She looked at him. "I want to understand what she knows and what she wants. And I want to do it before Do-won makes his next move, because right now I'm sitting in a hospital room, and you're the one with a bullet wound. And that means the situation is not going well, and I am not going to wait passively for the next thing to happen." He held her gaze. All right, meaning what?" "Meaning talk to her. But take Ji-yeon with you." He meant the attorney Kim Ji-yeon, whose contact information was on Imani's kitchen counter. "Don't go without counsel." "I wasn't planning to," Imani said. She met Agent Cho 2 days later, with Kim Ji-yeon beside her, in a coffee shop in Capitol Hill. Cho was 43, Korean-American. With the compact efficiency of someone who had spent a career learning to make people comfortable enough to talk. She ordered a plain coffee and didn't open a notebook. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Tell me what you know," Imani said. Cho looked at her for a moment with something that might have been respect. Direct. Good. She wrapped both hands around her cup. "The SEO organization has been under federal observation for 2 years. We're not investigating Joon-hyuk's criminal operations. We're mostly past that, given how much he's dismantled. We're investigating Baek Do-won, and the CO organization is adjacent to that investigation because Do-won's network intersects with several former CO agreements." "What do you want from me specifically?" Imani asked. "Nothing incriminating," Cho said. "You're not a target. You're not a witness to any criminal act, and I'm not here to build a case against the man whose child you're carrying." She paused, with the careful timing of someone delivering the sentence that mattered. "I'm here because we have evidence that Do-won is planning a second action against the CO family, and because that evidence suggests the next target is not Joon-hyuk." The coffee shop was warm and full of ordinary Thursday afternoon noise. Someone at the counter was ordering a complicated latte. The door kept opening and closing with a small bell. "What target?" Ji-yeon said before Imani could. Cho looked at Imani. "Not at Ji-yeon, at Imani. He's going to use your school," Cho said. "Not an arson this time. A direct demonstration of leverage. He wants to communicate to Joon-hyuk and to the remaining factions that walking away from the network has civilian consequences." Imani felt the cold move through her from the chest outward. "My kid," she said. "We don't believe any children are his intended target," Cho said carefully. "The objective is the building, the disruption, and the message. But collateral risk in these operations is..." She stopped. "I want to be honest with you. I can't guarantee containment. Imani looked at the table surface, the grain of the wood, the paper sleeve on her cup. She was breathing in a very controlled way that she was doing consciously, because if she stopped thinking about it, she wasn't sure it would continue on its own. When? Ji-yeon asked. We believe within 2 weeks, Cho said, which is why I'm here now. What do you want? Imani said. Her voice was flat and clear. Specifically, what is the ask? I want access to surveillance records from the Haryun building, in Sodu from the night of the summit. We have audio from inside the room, but the external security footage from that building would give us a complete picture of Do-won's movement and the coordination of the parking structure ambush. That footage would support a federal warrant for Do-won's arrest before he makes his next move. That footage belongs to Haryun, Ji-yeon said. I know, Cho said. I'm asking Ms. Whitaker because I believe she has standing to request it through Joon-hyuk, and I believe Joon-hyuk, given his current situation, may be willing to cooperate in a way that protects his interests and removes Do-won before the second action occurs. She looked at Imani. I could ask him directly. I'm asking you because you're not sedated in a hospital bed, and because you're the one with skin in this game that nobody in my office can dismiss. You mean the baby, Imani said. I mean you, Cho said. The baby is part of it. But you was making decisions since before he knew about the pregnancy, since before he knew and you're the one sitting in front of me right now, and I think you understand what I'm offering. Imani was quiet for a moment. If he cooperates, if the footage leads to a warrant and Do-won is arrested, what does that mean for Joon-hyuk's exposure? We're not investigating him, Cho said again. That's not an answer. Cho held her gaze. Formal cooperation in removing Do-won would be viewed favorably by our office. Favorably in ways I can put in writing. Ji-yeon made a note. I need to talk to him, Imani said. Of course, Cho said. And I need something from you first, Imani said. Not a request, a requirement. Cho's eyes sharpened slightly. Go ahead. If Do-won moves on that school before you have the warrant, your office puts people on that building. My students are in there. I don't care about the operational timeline. I care about 22 8-year-olds. Cho held her gaze for a long beat. We can do that, she said. In writing, Ji-yeon said. In writing, Cho agreed. Imani drove back to the hospital with Ji-yeon beside her, running through legal implications, and Imani's brain running through an entirely different calculation how to present this to a man who was 3 days out of surgery, who had spent 6 years trying to end his organization cleanly and without federal involvement, who was going to hear the word cooperate and feel it as a specific kind of failure, even if it was also the correct move. She sat beside his bed that evening and told him everything in sequence, without omission, and watched his face while she did it. He said nothing for a long time after she finished. The machines made their small, consistent sounds. Down the hall someone was talking. The light in the room was the particular yellow of hospital evenings that made everything look slightly worse than it was. She wants the Sodu footage, he said finally. Yes. And in exchange, favorable consideration for your cooperation. In writing, he looked at the ceiling. I've spent 6 years trying to end this without handing federal investigators a map to everything my father built. I know, if I give them the footage, they're not investigating you, Imani said. Cho was clear, they want Do-won. Cho says that now, he said. Investigations expand, yes, Imani said, they do. And your school, my school, is on Do-won's list. And there are 22 8-year-olds in that building 3 days a week. And I am not going to ask them to absorb the consequences of you protecting an organization you've been trying to dismantle for 6 years. He looked at her. She held his gaze. I'm not telling you what to do, she said. I told you I wouldn't. But I'm telling you what I know. And what I know is that the table didn't work, and the summits didn't work, and you have a bullet wound in your shoulder, and we have a daughter who is 20 weeks old and kicking, and I am not. Her voice stayed even. Barely. I am not going to sit in another hospital waiting room. The silence that followed was not empty. It had weight and texture, and the specific density of a decision being made in real time. Ji-yeon needs to be on every call with Cho, he said. Every meeting, nothing verbal only. Agreed, Imani said. And I want to see the written agreement about the school security before the footage transfers. I'll tell her tonight. He nodded. Slowly, because his shoulder made fast movements in negotiation. His eyes came back to her face. You walked into a federal agent's office, he said. Coffee shop, she said. She picked a coffee shop. For a man with a criminal organization. For a man who's been dismantling one. Imani said. That's a distinction that matters. Something in his expression shifted. Not quite a smile, he was too tired and too medicated for a full smile, but the thing underneath where a smile comes from. Imani. What? Thank you, he said, for not he stopped. Searched for the right shape. For staying in the fight. She looked at him in the yellow hospital light. This man she had met at a hotel bar in August, who had disappeared before sunrise and come back as the owner of her school and the father of her child, and someone she was increasingly sure, trying to be better than what he'd inherited, which was not the same as being good, but was maybe enough to build on. We're not done yet, she said. She got home at 9 that night and found Hiran in the hallway outside the guest apartment, not sitting, standing with her back against the wall and her arms folded, and the particular posture of a woman who has been waiting long enough that the waiting has become structural. Imani stopped. What are you doing here? I need to tell you something, Hiran said. Something I should have told you before the summit. The hallway was quiet. Imani looked at her, at the tension in her jaw, at the thing sitting behind her eyes that wasn't grief exactly, but was in the same family. Come in, Imani said. Hiran sat at Imani's kitchen table with her coat on, her hands flat in front of her. Imani sat across from her and did not offer tea because she was out of patience for the ritual of it. The leak, Hiran said. Park Sung-min, what about him? He wasn't working alone. Imani went still. The second source, Hiran said. The one who's been coordinating with Do-won's organization directly. Not just passing information, but actively shaping how Do-won understood Joon-hyuk's timeline and his vulnerabilities. She looked at Imani with the expression of a woman paying a debt she had owed too long. It's someone Joon-hyuk trusts completely, has trusted for years. Who? Imani said. Hiran's hands pressed flat against the table. His head of security, she said. Shin Tae-yang. He's been with our family for 11 years. The name landed in the room, like something physical. Imani's brain ran back through 11 weeks of security arrangements, through every decision about where she would be, and when, through the black SUV outside her apartment, and the penthouse floor access, and the summit location itself, the building Joon-hyuk had chosen because he trusted the security personnel there. How long have you known? Imani asked. Hiran's jaw tightened. 3 days. 3 days, Imani repeated. You knew before the summit. I wasn't certain, but you knew enough to be sitting in this hallway tonight. Imani's voice was very flat. You knew enough that you couldn't sleep. Hiran didn't look away. I made a calculation. If I told Joon-hyuk and I was wrong, I destroyed his trust in a man who has protected this family for a decade. If I told him and I was right, if you were right, Imani said, he walked into a building with Do-won knowing that his own head of security had been feeding Do-won the location, the layout, the personnel count, and his exit route. Hiran closed her eyes for 1 second. Yes, Imani stood up from the table. She walked to the window. She stood there with her back to Hiran, and her hand on her stomach, and breathed through the full scope of what she was hearing, that the man who had arranged the summit, who had chosen the building, who had positioned the security team, had done all of it with Shin Tae-yang at his side, and Shin Tae-yang had handed every detail to Do-won before the first guest arrived. The shooting hadn't been opportunistic. It had been engineered. She turned around. You're going to call Ji Yeon tonight, Imani said. You're going to tell her exactly what you told me and everything you know about Shin Tae-yang, and she is going to relay it to Agent Cho, and you are going to do that before 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Hiran looked at her steadily. And Joon-hyuk? I'll tell him, Imani said. When he's strong enough to hear it without doing something that lands him in a different hospital ward, he'll want to handle it himself. I know, Imani said. That's why I'm telling you to call Ji Yeon first. We do this through the right channel, or we don't get another chance to do it right. Hiran was quiet for a moment. Then you're very certain for someone who's been in this world for 4 months. I'm certain because I have 22 kids in a school that's on a target list and a daughter who is going to be born into whatever we build in the next 3 weeks, Imani said. I don't have the luxury of being uncertain. Hiranson stood. She straightened her coat. She looked at Imani with the expression that Imani was beginning to recognize the one that had started as assessment and was becoming something else, something with more corners to it. He chose well, Hiran said quietly. Go call Ji Yeon, Imani said. After Hiran left, Imani stood alone in her kitchen, with the envelope of attorney documents on the counter, and the city lights through the window, and the full weight of what she now knew pressing down on her in the particular silence of 2 in the morning. Shin Tae-yang still had access to this building. He still had access to the security schedules, the camera systems, the access codes for the penthouse floor. He didn't know that Hyran had told her. He didn't know that the FBI had the summit footage, or that Cho was building toward a warrant, or that the internal architecture of Doowan's information network was, piece by piece, being mapped by people whose job it was to dismantle it. But he was still here, still inside the perimeter. Still the person Joon-hyuk called when something needed to be secured. Imani picked up her phone. She did not call Joon-hyuk. Not yet. She called Agent Cho directly at 2:20 in the morning, and Cho answered on the second ring because that was the kind of agent she was. Shin Tae-yang, Imani said, Joon-hyuk's head of security. He's your second source inside Hair Yoon. He engineered the parking structure ambush. A pause on Cho's end. Brief professional. How certain are you? Cho asked. Certain enough to be calling you at 2 in the morning, Imani said. Another pause. Then don't move him. Don't tip him. If he knows we have him, he goes to ground and takes everything we have on Doowan with him. I know, Imani said. Can you... Cho started again. Can you keep your access to the penthouse floor normal for the next 48 hours? Don't change codes. Don't remove access. Don't do anything that signals the security architecture has been compromised. Imani stood in her kitchen at 2 in the morning, 17 weeks pregnant, being asked to spend 48 hours inside a building whose head of security was actively working against the man she was carrying a child for, and she thought about her answer for exactly as long as it took to draw one full breath. Yes, she said. The 48 hours Cho had asked for felt like a specific kind of slow motion falling. Imani went through them with the deliberate normalcy of a woman who understood that her behavior was now operational. She made coffee in the guest kitchen at 7 each morning. She took the elevator down to the building's small gym at 9 because her OB had said low-impact movement was good, and because movement kept her from sitting still long enough to fully process what she was maintaining. She nodded to the Lopsy security desk on her way back up. She said good morning to Shin Tae-yang on the second morning when he passed her in the penthouse corridor, and she held his gaze for exactly the length of time that was normal, not a second longer, and walked past him with her coffee cup in hand, and her heart doing something loud and uncooperative in her chest. He said good morning back. He had careful eyes. She'd noticed that before without filing it as meaningful. Now she filed it. She visited Joon-hyuk at the hospital both afternoons. She did not tell him about Shin Tae-yang. This was the hardest thing she had done in a sequence of hard things, sitting beside his bed while he was recovering and talking about Cho's investigation and Ji Yeon's progress on the written agreement and the school security arrangement, and not saying the name of the man who had put him in that bed. She justified it the way Cho had justified it. 48 hours. Controlled environment. Don't move until you can move completely. She justified it the way she justified everything hard, which was by keeping her eyes on the outcome rather than the discomfort of the present. A second afternoon, he looked at her with the focused attention that the sedation reduction had returned to him and said, You're holding something. I'm holding a lot of things, she said. Something specific. She met his eyes. Give me until tomorrow morning, she said. Then I'll tell you everything. He studied her face. She could see him running the calculation trust versus need to know, versus the physical reality that he was not currently in a position to act on whatever she was holding, even if she told him. Tomorrow morning, he said. Yes. He nodded once. And let it go, which cost him something. She could see that, and she made a note of it as evidence of how much he had changed from the man who had made unilateral decisions about what she needed to know. She got the call from Cho at 6:47 the next morning. We're moving at 8, Cho said. Federal warrant for Doowan signed 40 minutes ago. We're picking up Shin Tae-yang simultaneously. We can't risk him tipping Doowan when he sees the arrest teams move. Imani was sitting on the edge of her bed, still in yesterday's clothes, because she had not slept. What do you need from me? Stay in the building, Cho said. Don't use the elevator. Don't be in any shared space until I call you back. We have agents in the building already. They came in through the service entrance at 4 this morning. Does Joon-hyuk know? His attorney was notified 20 minutes ago. Ji Yeon is at the hospital now. Imani absorbed this. Okay, Ms. Whitaker. Cho's voice shifted slightly, not unprofessional, but human. You did well. Tell me that when it's done, Imani said. She sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the building around her. It was a quiet building on a normal morning, the kind of quiet that expensive construction bought you, insulated, buffered, separate from the city noise below. She could hear nothing useful. No footsteps in the corridor, no voices, no indication that anything was happening beyond the ordinary rhythms of a residential floor waking up. At 7:52, she heard the elevator. At 7:54, she heard voices in the corridor, 2, maybe 3, clipped and professional, and then a single sharp sound she identified correctly, and immediately, and then did not move for 15 seconds, while every instinct she had argued with the instruction to stay in the building. She texted Cho. Something happened in the corridor. I heard Cho called before she finished typing. We have a situation. Shin Tae-yong became aware. He's contained, but there was a discharge, no injuries. Our agent is fine. Stay where you are. I mean it. Is he contained? Cho said. Don't open your door. She didn't open the door. Splitting. She sat on the edge of the bed with her phone in both hands and breathed with the focused attention of a woman who was going to get through the next 12 minutes on breathing alone, if that's what it required. And she counted her inhales, because counting was something her hands could do without her brain's full participation. Which was good because her brain was otherwise occupied. At 8:17, Cho knocked twice and said her name. Imani opened the door. The corridor was clear. 2 agents she hadn't seen before were at the elevator. Cho was in front of her, coat on, hair pulled back, looking like a woman who had just finished the first half of a very long day. Shin Tae-yong is in custody, Cho said. Doowan's arrest team moved at 8. He was at a property in Bellevue. It went clean. Imani let out a breath that had been partially held for 48 hours. The school, she said. We had agents on site from 6 this morning. Nothing moved on that building. Cho paused. It's over, Miss Whitaker. The active threat is contained. Imani nodded. Her legs felt strange. Not weak, just suddenly aware of how much tension they'd been holding without her permission. I need to get to the hospital, she said. Cho stepped aside. I'll drive you. She told Joon-hyuk everything in the order it had happened, sitting in the chair beside his bed, with the morning light coming through the window, starting from Hiran in the hallway and going forward through Cho and Shin Tae-yong and the 48 hours and the warrant and the arrest and the agents on the school building, and she did not editorialize or soften any of it, and she did not look away from his face while she talked. His expression did several things during that account. The thing it did when she said Shin Tae-yong's name was the thing she would remember longest, not rage, though that came, but before it, for exactly 2 seconds, something that looked like a man absorbing a wound he hadn't seen coming, and understanding that it was real. 11 years. Shin Tae-yong had been with his family for 11 years. When she finished, the room was quiet. You knew for 48 hours, he said. Yes. And you stayed in the building. Cho needed the security architecture intact, she said. Moving me would have signaled the compromise. He looked at her. You stayed in a building with a man who engineered my shooting. I stayed in a building where 2 FBI agents had been in place since 4 in the morning and where the only person who didn't know the net was closing was the one it was closing on. She held his gaze. I assessed the risk and I stayed. That was my call to make. His jaw was tight. I should have been... You were in a hospital bed, she said. And even if you weren't, this was Cho's operation, and Ji Yeon's legal framework, and my decision about my own safety. You don't get to be the variable in every equation. He stopped. The tightness in his jaw shifted into something else. No, he said quietly. I don't. They sat with that for a moment. Doo-won is in federal custody, she said. Shin Tae-yong is in federal custody. Cho says the evidence from the So-do footage combined with Shin Tae-yong's knowledge of Doo-won's network is enough to take down most of his senior structure. She paused. It's not over, but the part that was going to kill you is over. He was quiet for a moment. Then the remaining factions. Cho thinks the arrest will accelerate their willingness to accept your withdrawal terms. Without Doo-won to enforce the old agreements, the leverage that was keeping them resistant goes away. He leaned his head back against the pillow and looked at the ceiling. He looked tired in a way that went deeper than the surgery, deeper than the blood loss, the specific exhaustion of a man who had been holding something enormous for a long time and could feel it beginning, very slowly, to release. Imani, he said. What? When Amara is old enough to ask about this, he stopped. We'll figure that out, she said, when she's old enough to ask. He turned his head to look at her. Thank you, he said, for doing what I couldn't. Don't thank me yet, she said. You still have a corporation to legitimize, and a family to put back together, and a daughter who is going to want an explanation for all of this someday. I know, and you owe your mother a conversation. He closed his eyes briefly. I know that too. She stood up and picked up her bag. I'll be back tonight. Sleep. I don't need. You have a hole in your shoulder, and you've been awake since 6, she said. Sleep. He slept. She was almost at the elevator when her phone buzzed. Not Cho, not Ji-yeon, a number she didn't know, Seattle area code, she answered. Miss Whitaker. The voice was male, low, with a Pacific Northwest accent that had Korean underneath it. My name is not important. What's important is that you understand something before you decide the situation is resolved. She stopped walking. Who is this? Baek Do-won has been arrested, the voice said. I know this. You know this. What you don't know is that Do-won made contingency arrangements before he walked into that summit. Not for himself. For the message. The elevator opened. She didn't get in. What message, she said. That the CO withdrawal has consequences that survive Do-won's arrest, the voice said. He arranged a demonstration, independent of his organization, so that the arrest couldn't stop it. It was already in motion before 8 o'clock this morning. Her throat was tight. What demonstration? The school, the voice said. Not the building. Something more specific. Something that says the people around CO Joon-hyuk are reachable even when Do-won is in a cell. She was already moving back down the corridor. If this is a bluff, call Agent Cho, the voice said. Tell her to look at the school's utility access. The demonstration is not designed for casualties. It is designed for fear. But the difference between those two things is timing. And timing is running. The line went dead. She called Cho while she was running. Cho answered in one ring. Ms. Whitaker, Imani said. Utility access. Do-won set something up independently before his arrest. The caller said it's already in motion. A half-second pause. Then Cho's voice shifted into operational register. I'm calling the on-site team now. Stay on the line. Imani hit the stairwell because the elevator was too slow and she went down 4 floors before she realized she had no car in the building's garage and flagged that as a problem to solve in 30 seconds. She could hear Cho talking on another line over the open call, clipped and fast, the language of someone coordinating multiple moving parts simultaneously. Imani, Cho was back. The on-site team is moving to utility access now. We need you to stay. I'm not going to the school, Imani said. She had stopped in the stairwell landing, hand on the railing. I know. I'm not going there. But I need to know if my kids are in that building. It's 8:43, Cho said. First bell is 9, which meant teachers were there. Staff was there. Students were arriving. Can you get them out? Imani said. We're working on that right now, Cho said. Ms. Whitaker, I need you to let me work. She pressed her back against the stairwell wall. The concrete was cold through her coat. Below her, she could hear the building's ambient mechanical sounds, the hum of the heating system, the distant pressure of the ventilation, everything ordinary and structural and indifferent to what was happening 4 miles away at Clearwater Elementary. She thought about Marcus Chen in the front row, about Kezia, who cried during fire drills but always held someone's hand, about Jalen, who had held Marcus's hand across the assembly field and who she'd noted for, later and later, had never come because the world had accelerated past it. Scene. She thought about Dr. Osi, who had looked at her parking lot after the first fire and said, "Are you safe with the particular care of a woman who understood that I'm working on it?" was the only honest answer available. She stood in the stairwell and did not move because there was nowhere to move to, and because the agents on the ground were already there, and her presence would add exactly nothing except another variable for them to manage. She had never in her adult life felt more powerless than she did in those 6 minutes. Cho called back at 8:51. The utility access point had been tampered with, Cho said. Gas line to the administrative wing. It wasn't set to ignite, it was set to accumulate. Timed release, starting at 8:30, designed to reach a concentration threshold around 9:15, when the building would be full. The on-site team shut it down, Cho said. The building is being evacuated as a precaution. No injuries. Imani sat down on the stairwell step because her legs had finished their shift. No injuries, she said. No injuries. She put her free hand on her stomach. The baby moved that small flutter, the private shifting weight of something that had no knowledge of parking structures or gas lines or men in federal custody who made contingency arrangements. I need a minute, Imani said. Take it, Cho said, and didn't hang up. And the open line was the right thing, just the presence of another person on the other end, while Imani sat on a concrete step in a stairwell and breathed through the full reality of the last 6 hours. After a minute, she said, "What happens now?" "Now we add the gas line tampering to the federal case," Cho said. "Pre-arranged contingency actions are still Do-won's responsibility. His attorney is going to have a difficult morning." A pause. "The major exposure is over, Ms. Whitaker. The arrest, the evidence, Shin Tae-young's cooperation, the remaining factions don't have a structure to rally behind. They'll negotiate. And Joon-hyuk. His attorney will be in contact with our office this week," Cho said. "The cooperation agreement stands. I intend to honor it." Imani nodded, even though Cho couldn't see it. "Thank you," she said, "for answering at 2 in the morning. Thank you for making the call," Cho said. She went back up to his floor. He was not asleep. He was sitting up in the bed with his phone in his hand and the expression of a man who had been receiving information through channels, while she was in the stairwell, which she should have expected because Joon-hyuk's information network did not take a break because its operator was hospitalized. "The school," he said. "Everyone is safe," she said. She sat down. "Everyone is safe." He looked at her for a long moment. The morning light had shifted while she was in the stairwell, moved across the room to a different angle, and it caught the lines of his face in a way that made him look both older and less armored than usual. "It's done," he said. "The active part," she said. "The rest is paperwork and lawyers and Cho's office and GAON and your corporate restructuring team and probably several conversations with your parents that I am not going to be present for." His mouth did the thing that wasn't quite a smile. "Coward, strategic," she said. He looked at his hands, then at her. "Come here," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "Not," he stopped. "Just come here." She moved the chair closer. He reached out with his good arm, the one without the IV line, and she let him take her hand, and his grip careful but present, the grip of a man who was checking that something real was in the room with him. They sat like that for a while, without talking. Outside the hospital window, Seattle was doing what it always did in late November gray sky, intermittent rain. The city carrying on with the self-sufficient momentum of a place that had been through enough to stop being surprised by disruption. Ferries crossing the Sound. Traffic on the bridge. Ordinary life at ordinary speed. "I have to call my father," he said finally. "I know." And Tae-yang, his jaw tightened on the name. "I need to understand how long." "Jiyeon can get you the timeline from Cho's records," she said. "Not today." "No," he said, "not today." His hand was still around hers. She didn't pull away. "Joon-hyuk." "What?" "When you get out of here," she said, "we need to have a real conversation. Not about security or lawyers or the organization. About Amara. About what we're building." She paused. "About what we are." He was quiet for a moment. "Then I know." "Do you know what you want?" she asked. He looked at her directly. His eyes were clearer than they'd been since the surgery, the medication wearing down to a level where the full weight of his attention was available. "Yes," he said. She held his gaze. "Then we'll talk," she said. "When you're out." She stood, picked up her bag. His hand let go of hers with the deliberate patience of a man who had learned expensively what it cost to let things go too fast. At the door she stopped. "The anonymous caller," she said. "The one who told me about the school. Do you know who that was?" A beat, something moved behind his eyes. "No," he said. She looked at him for exactly long enough to know he was lying, and long enough for him to know she knew. "We'll talk about that too," she said. "When you're out." She left him with that and walked down the hospital corridor toward the elevator and did not look back, because looking back was the thing she was consistently refusing to do. And she had gotten this far by facing forward, and she intended to keep going in that direction, regardless of what came next. Her phone rang as the elevator doors opened. Jiyeon. The remaining faction heads contacted Joon-hyuk's corporate office this morning, Jiyeon said, without preamble. "All 4. They want to negotiate withdrawal terms." A pause, the briefest acknowledgement of what that meant. "It's over, Imani. The structure is gone." Imani stepped into the elevator. "Draw up the terms," she said. The doors closed. She rode down alone in the small humming space of the elevator and put her hand on her stomach and felt the baby move. And for the first time in 3 weeks, she let herself think past the immediate problem, past the next 12 hours, past the next negotiation, past the next thing that needed doing, and let herself think about April, about a girl named Amara, about what a life looked like when the thing you'd been fighting against was finally, genuinely, structurally gone. It didn't look like relief, exactly. It looked like a door standing open, and on the other side of it, the ordinary, complicated human work of building something that was only hers and his and theirs, without a war around it. The elevator reached the lobby. The door opened. She walked out into the November morning. Ji-yeon's call about the faction heads came on a Tuesday. By Friday, she had preliminary terms drafted for all 4 organizations. By the following Wednesday, 3 of them had signed. The fourth, a smaller network operating primarily out of Tacoma, took an additional week and 2 rounds of revision before their representative put a pen to paper in Ji-yeon's Portland office conference room, while 2 FBI observers sat in the corner taking notes that would become part of the formal cooperation record. Joon-hyuk was not present for any of those signings. He was still in the hospital for the first one, and under explicit medical instruction to avoid stress for the second and third, which Ji-yeon communicated to him daily, with the practiced firmness of a woman who had decided that keeping her client alive was a prerequisite for keeping him out of federal proceedings. He followed the instruction imperfectly. He was on the phone with Ji-yeon for 2 hours, the day of the first signing. Had his corporate restructuring team on a conference call the day of the second, and sent him text messages over the course of the third that ranged from legal strategy to a question about whether she'd eaten, which she found both irritating and, in the specific exhausted state of her 21st week of pregnancy, quietly steadying. She texted back 8. Call Ji-yeon. He called Ji-yeon. He was discharged 11 days after the shooting, on a gray December morning that smelled like rain and cold pavement and the particular Seattle winter that settled in for the duration and made no apologies about it. Imani drove him home because Hiran had offered and he'd declined, and his remaining security personnel were, pending a comprehensive review Cho's office was conducting, temporarily operating at reduced capacity while their backgrounds were re-vetted. The irony of Joon-hyuk, former head of a criminal organization, sitting in the passenger seat of Imani's 10-year-old Civic with a seatbelt carefully positioned away from his shoulder wound while she navigated traffic, was not lost on either of them. Neither of them mentioned it. The restructuring team wants a meeting next week, he said, somewhere on I-5. Next week you're resting, she said. I've been resting for 11 days. You've been in a hospital for 11 days, she said. That's different. Next week you rest at home, and the week after you have the meeting. He looked at her profile. You're very authoritative about my recovery schedule. Someone has to be, she said. Your version of rest involves 7 texts and a 2-hour call with your attorney. He was quiet for a moment. 8 texts, he said. She kept her eyes on the road. I know. He was quiet for the rest of the drive, but it was a different quiet than his usual, less contained. More like a man allowing himself to sit in a moment without immediately managing it forward. She noticed. She didn't comment on it. She pulled into the building's garage and parked, and came around to his side before he could attempt the door with one arm, and he accepted the help with only a brief expression of resistance that he swallowed before it became an argument, which she also noticed and also didn't comment on because some evolutions were better observed than named. They took the elevator to the penthouse floor in silence. Outside the guest apartment door, she stopped. He stopped too. Come in, she said. Not to the guest apartment, to his. He looked at her. We said we'd talk, she said. When you were out. You're out. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he reached past her with his good arm and opened his door. His apartment was clean and impersonal, in the way of a space that had been occupied primarily by a man who slept there and worked everywhere else. Good furniture, good light, almost nothing on the surfaces. Someone had brought in groceries she suspected Hiran, or one of the building staff, and the kitchen counter held a paper bag from a market that she happened to know was 2 blocks from the CO family's waterfront estate. She sat on the couch. A set teen. He sat in the chair across from her, angled slightly to take the pressure off his shoulder, and they looked at each other in the December afternoon light with everything that had accumulated between August and now sitting in the room with them. "The anonymous caller," she said. "The one who warned me about the school." He held her gaze. "Yes." "Was it your father?" A pause. "Brief, yes." She absorbed this. He knew about the gas line before it was activated. "He had contacts in Doo-won's network that I didn't know about," Joon-hyuk said. "Old relationships from before I took over. He'd been quietly maintaining them, not for operational purposes. For intelligence." He paused. "He found out about the contingency arrangement the night before. He didn't tell me because he didn't want me making decisions from a hospital bed that I might not make clearly. He called you instead. He trusted me to handle it." "Yes." She thought about Moojin in the hospital waiting room at 2 in the morning saying, "This is what I built. This is what it does." And the way he'd looked at her across the table of the guest apartment when she'd said she assessed at risk by doing the next thing. She thought about what it meant that a man who had run a criminal organization for 30 years had looked at his son's situation and decided the person to call was a 26-year-old third-grade teacher. "I need to talk to him," she said. "I know," Joon-hyuk said. "He knows too." She nodded. "Filed it, Shin Tae-yang," she said. His jaw tightened in the specific way it did when he was keeping something behind his teeth by deliberate effort. Ji-yeon says, "The cooperation with Cho's office has been substantial. He's given them enough on Doo-won's internal structure to support prosecution on 6 separate federal counts." A pause. He was being leveraged. His younger sister would denet to Doo-won's network gambling, significant amounts. Doo-won bought the debt and used it. "How long?" 18 months, he said. 18 months of the man responsible for his security feeding his vulnerabilities to a rival. 18 months of Shin Tae-yang knowing where Joon-hyuk went and who he trusted, what he valued, what could be used. He told Doo-won about the hotel conference. Joon-hyuk said quietly, "August." He told Doo-won I would be there, and that I was attempting to step back from the organization and spend time in a way that was not monitored. Doo-won didn't act on it at the time, but it was in the record. Imani was very still. "What does that mean?" "It means Doo-won knew about our night together before I did," Joon-hyuk said. "It means when I disappeared in the morning, it wasn't only because I was worried about your safety in the abstract. Tae-yong had been present when I left. He knew I'd met someone, and he stopped. His hands resting on his knees pressed slightly. I realized that morning that if anyone in my organization had seen us together, she was already potentially exposed. I didn't know how much. I made the fastest calculation I could. You left to protect me," Imani said. "Imperfectly," he said, and without explaining. "Which was wrong." "Yes," she said. "It was." She paused. "But I understand it now in a way I didn't before." He looked at her. "It doesn't make it right," she said. "I want to be clear about that. You made a decision about my safety without me. And that's the pattern I've spent the last 4 months asking you to break. And you've been breaking it, piece by piece. And I see that." She held his gaze. "But I understand where it came from. And that's different from excusing it." He nodded, slowly. "I know the difference," he said. "Good," she said. They sat with that for a moment. His sister, Imani, said, "Tae-yang's. The debt has been cleared," he said, "through legitimate channels. Ji-yeon arranged it." She looked at him. "It doesn't change what he did," Joon-hyuk said. "But she didn't choose her brother's situation, and she's not responsible for it." He paused. "I've spent 6 years making decisions about what the people around me deserve. I'd rather start making different ones." She sat with that. "Joon-hyuk," she said. What do you want?" she asked. "Not for the organization. Not for Hae-ryun. For yourself. For Amara, a pause for us." He looked at her for a long time. Outside the window, the December light was doing what December light did, thin and honest, and without flattery, illuminating everything exactly as it was. "I want to build something that doesn't require a security team to maintain," he said. "I want Hae-ryun to be what I've been pretending it was for 6 years, actually legitimate, actually clean. I want offices that don't have men posted outside them because someone might want to make a point." He paused. "I want to be somewhere when my daughter says her first word. I want to know what classroom she's in. I want to go to her school events and not spend the whole time calculating exits." Imani listened, and he stopped, looked at his hands, looked back at her. "I want to not be the version of myself that left a note on a nightstand and checked out at 5:45 in the morning. I want to be the version that stays." The room was quiet. "That's a lot of wanting," she said. Yes, he said. Some of it's going to be hard, she said. The corporation has real structural work to do. The federal cooperation is going to have ongoing requirements. Your parents are, she stopped. Your parents are a whole separate conversation. I know. And Amara is going to be born in April, and she is going to require things from you that no criminal organization ever did, which includes being present at 2 in the morning for reasons that have nothing to do with strategy. I know that too, do you? She asked. Not unkindly. He looked at her directly. No, he said. Not yet. But I intend to learn. She studied his face. The tiredness in it, the damage the last 3 weeks had done to the controlled exterior that he maintained like infrastructure, not gone, but visible under it, the actual face of the man. And it was a face she had been looking at since August, and still wasn't finished looking at. Okay, she said. He waited. We build it, she said, carefully, without rushing because the war is over and we feel like rushing. Without pretending the last 4 months didn't happen, or that trust is something you restore by wanting to. She looked at him steadily. We build it the way you're dismantling the organization, piece by piece, and we tell each other the truth when it's hard, especially then. Yes, he said, and Amara comes first, she said. Every time there's a conflict between what's convenient and what's right for her, it's not a discussion. Agreed, he said. She reached over and picked up the paper bag from the market. She looked inside it. Fruit, rice, something in a container from what looked like a restaurant she recognized. Your mother, she said. Probably, he said. I need to talk to her too, Imani said. She knows that, said she's been. He paused. She's been asking about you. Through channels, which is her way, but she's been asking. She tried to pay me to disappear, Imani said. Yes, I'm going to bring that up. I would expect nothing less, he said. She set the bag down. She looked at him across the coffee table in the December afternoon light, with all of it between them, the hotel bar and the note on the nightstand, and the pregnancy test, and the school tour, and the black SUV, and the summit, and the hospital, and the stairwell, and the 48 hours, and the elevator door closing on a November morning, with Ji-yeon's voice saying, It's over, and she thought about what it meant to be sitting here, in this room with this man, on the other side of all of it. I'm going to make dinner, she said. He blinked. What? You need to eat something real, and I'm hungry. And there's food in that bag, she said. Do you have a pot that works? He looked at her for a moment with an expression she hadn't seen from him before, unguarded, briefly lost, the expression of a man who had been braced for a more dramatic conclusion and had gotten something ordinary instead, and was finding ordinary more disorienting than dramatic. Yes, he said. Second cabinet on the left. She made dinner in his kitchen while he sat at the counter and watched, and didn't try to help, because his arm was in a sling, and she hadn't invited assistance, and he was learning, piece by piece, to read the difference. They ate at his kitchen table, with the city lights coming on, outside the window, and talked about small things, the restructuring timeline, the name of the lead contractor on a Harian development project she'd heard him mention, whether the guest apartment would work as a nursery once modifications were made to the building's layout, practical things, real things, the architecture of a life being assembled from available materials. She met with Moojin 3 days later at the waterfront estate. He was in when she arrived, which surprised her. December was not a garden month, but he was walking the perimeter path with his cane and didn't come inside until he'd completed the full circuit, which she understood was a matter of principle, and waited for him on the stone bench near the gate. He sat down beside her without ceremony. You wanted to talk, he said. I want to understand something, she said. When you called me about the school, you'd known about the gas line for how long? 6 hours, he said. I needed to verify before I moved. 6 hours, she said. And in those 6 hours, you didn't call Joon-hyuk. No. Why? He looked at the water. The sound was gray and flat in the December cold, running straight to the horizon where the sky met it without distinction. Because Joon-hyuk would have made it about stopping Do-won, he said, and the priority was the school. Those are different objectives, and you thought I would keep them separate. I thought you would go straight to the thing that mattered, he said. I was right. She looked at his profile, the lines of it, the age in it, the particular exhaustion of a man who had built something and spent the last years watching someone else try to undo it, and understanding, slowly and at cost, that the undoing was the right thing. You built something that hurt your son, she said. He didn't look away from the water. Yes. And you let it hurt him for a long time before you helped stop it. Yes. She waited. I told myself it was the price of the structure, he said. That the network provided things protection, stability, income for people who had nothing, and that the price was worth paying. He paused. I was wrong. Not about the protection. About what it cost. I counted the wrong things. What changed? She said. He was quiet for a moment. I watched him try to end it, he said. For 6 years I watched him try, and I didn't make it easy, because making it easy felt like admitting I should have done it myself. He turned to look at her. And then I watched you. A woman who had no reason to stay in any of this, who had every practical reason to take the money and leave, who stayed because she decided the truth mattered more than her comfort. A pause. I counted the wrong things for a long time. You made it harder to keep doing that. Imani looked at him. I didn't do it for you, she said. I know, he said. That's why it worked. She sat with that for a moment. Then, Amara is going to know her grandparents, she said. Both sets. That's not negotiable, and it's not conditional. But I need you to understand that she is going to grow up knowing the truth about this family, including the parts that aren't easy, and that the adults around her are going to have to be honest about that when she's old enough to ask. Mujin held her gaze. Yes, he said. She will. And I'm going to need her to see you choosing differently, she said. Not just retired, actively different. Because children learn from what they see adults do, and she is going to be watching. He was quiet for a long moment. I understand, he said. She stood up. Good. She picked up her bag. I'll see you at Christmas. Joon-hyuk is planning something small. He told me, Mujin said. She started toward the gate. Behind her, she heard him rise from the bench, the weight of the cane settling on the stone path. Ms. Whitaker, he said. She turned. Thank you, he said. For my son. She looked at him across the winter garden. That one I'll take, she said. She met with Hiran on a Saturday morning in mid-December in the CO family's kitchen at the waterfront estate, which was Hiran's territory. And her choice, and Imani arrived on time out of respect for the deliberateness of the choice. Hiran made tea, real tea, from a clay pot she handled with the efficiency of long practice, and she set the cup in front of Imani and sat across from her with her own cup, and looked at her with the eyes that had been calculating since the first phone call in October. You want to address the payment offer, Hiran said. I want to address everything, Imani said. Hiran nodded. Once. You went behind your son to try to remove a problem, Imani said. The problem was me and his child. You used his money, which I'm assuming you have access to for family operational purposes, and you offered it to a woman you'd never met, as though the situation was a transaction. Yes, Hiran said. That was wrong, Imani said. Not because of what it meant for me, though it was insulting. Because it assumed your son wasn't capable of handling his own life, and it assumed I was something to be managed rather than someone making my own choices. Hiran's hands were still around her cup. Her expression was not defensive, which was either composure or genuine acknowledgement, and Imani wasn't sure yet which it was. I was afraid, Hiran said. The word surprised Imani. Not the content, she'd understood the fear, underneath the offer, from the beginning. The surprise was that Hiran said it directly and without qualification. Of what specifically? Imani said. That he would choose you over the caution he needed to survive, Hiran said. That you would become the reason someone reached him. That I would lose my son because he fell in love with a woman who didn't understand what she was walking into. She paused. I have spent 30 years watching this family absorb the cost of my husband's choices. I did not want to watch my son absorb the cost of his. So you tried to make the cost disappear by making me disappear, Imani said. Yes, and when I didn't go, I understood that I had misread you, Hiran said, and that my son had not. Imani looked at her. At the precision of her posture, the careful absence of theatrics, the controlled honesty of a woman who was not going to perform remorse, but was also not going to pretend she hadn't done what she'd done. I am going to be in your family's life, Imani said. Not because of Amara, though because of her too. Because your son and I are building something, and I intend for it to be real, and I intend to still be in it when it's hard, which it will be. And that means we need to figure out how to be honest with each other. Yes, Hiran said. I'm not asking you to like me, Imani said. I'm asking you to deal with me directly. If you have concerns, bring them to me. Not to Joon-hyuk over my head, and not to me through an envelope. Hairan looked at her for a long moment. That is a fair condition, she said. It's not a condition, Imani said. It's how it works. A pause. Then something shifted in Hairan's expression, not softening exactly, but a settling, the look of a woman who had been braced against something and found she could stop bracing. You know, Hairan said, that Joon-hyuk has not once, in his adult life, brought a woman to meet his father. I didn't know that, Imani said. He did not bring you, Hairan said. You came. And you stayed. Another pause. I didn't understand the difference at first. I do now. Imani looked at her tea, then at Hairan. Your granddaughter is going to be born in April, she said. She's going to need people around her who are honest and who choose to show up. That's the only thing I actually need from you. Hairan held her gaze for a moment. I will be there, she said. Good, Imani said. They finished their tea. Hairan asked, without preamble, about the prenatal care-specific questions, informed ones, the questions of a woman who had been doing her own research, and Imani answered them, and then asked about Hairan's own pregnancy with Joon-hyuk, which no one had asked her in a long time, and the conversation they had for the next 40 minutes was different from any conversation they'd had before. Not warm exactly, not yet, but honest, and honest was enough to build from. Imani called her mother that evening. She sat on her bed in the guest apartment and told her everything. Not the managed version, not the editing she'd been doing for 3 months, but the actual sequence from the hotel bar, to the ultrasound, to the school fire, to the hospital, to the arrest and Cho and the gas line and the stairwell. Her mother was quiet through most of it, which was not her default mode, which meant she was paying the kind of attention that had always preceded her most useful responses. When Imani finished, there was a pause. So her mother said, the baby's father owns your school and used to run a crime organization and got shot, and the FBI was involved. That's the summary, yes, Imani said in your. Her mother paused. You're okay, I'm okay, Imani said, and this man. We're figuring it out, Imani said. Is he… Her mother stopped, assembled the question more carefully. Does he make you feel like you have to be less than you are? Imani thought about it. She thought about the child's chair in her classroom and him sitting in it without self-consciousness. She thought about immediately and the times he'd kept that promise and the one time he hadn't and how he'd handled both. She thought about the hospital bed and what do you need and the envelope on her kitchen counter with Ji Yeon's number. No, she said. He makes it harder to be less than I am, which is different. Her mother was quiet for a moment. Okay, she said. Then I need to meet him. You will, Imani said. Christmas, her mother said. With the crime family. Former, Imani said. Former crime family. Her mother made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sigh and contained significant amounts of both. You are always going to make my life interesting, she said. Since you were 3 years old. I know, Imani said. I'll bring pie, her mother said. Nobody is too Korean for pie. Joon-hyuk started outpatient physical therapy the second week of December, and Haryun Pacific's restructuring in the third. Imani went back to reviewing sub-reports for her class and making plans for her return in January, and started converting the larger of the penthouse building's second-floor units, a one-bedroom that had been used for overflow corporate guests, into something that could plausibly be called a home for a person under the age of 1. She did not do this alone. Hairan appeared on a Tuesday with paint samples and opinions about natural light, and a contractor she had apparently already vetted, which should have been presumptuous, and instead was, Imani found, simply practical. They disagreed about the color of the walls, and agreed about the floor material, and spent 40 minutes on the question of whether a crib should face the window, which was the most ordinary conversation Imani had had since August, and felt, for that reason, like something approaching solid ground. The federal case against Doo-won moved fast. Cho called Ji Yeon in late December, with a preliminary assessment between the So-do footage, Shin Tae-young's cooperation, the school fire evidence, the gas line arrangement, and the financial records from Doo-won's network. The prosecution was describing it as comprehensive. The word Cho used was airtight, which was a word prosecutors used carefully and which Ji-an received with the professional skepticism of someone who had been in enough courtrooms to know that airtight was aspirational, but which was nonetheless significant. Doo-won entered preliminary proceedings in January. His attorneys made the expected motions. The evidence was not cooperative with the motions. Shin Tae-yong pleaded to a reduced charge in exchange for full cooperation and was sentenced in February. Joon-hyuk received the sentencing notification through Ji Yeon and sat with it in his office for an hour before he called Imani. He got 4 years, he said, reduced from 12. She was at her Tulse desk she'd returned in January as planned, to 22 students who had made a handmade banner that said MS. Whitaker, we missed you in uneven letters, that she had taken down before she cried in front of them, which had been a near thing. How do you feel about that? She asked. A pause. Complicated, he said. Tell me. He betrayed this family, he said. He gave Do-won the information that led to my shooting. He put you in danger. And he also stopped. He was being leveraged by someone who understood how to break people by threatening what they love. And I've been in a position where I understood what it felt like to be unable to protect the people. He stopped again. You feel something for him, even though you're angry, Imani said. Yes, he said. It's human, she said. It's allowed. He was quiet. Joon-hyuk, she said. Being able to hold both things at once, the anger and the understanding, that's not weakness. That's what I've been watching you build for the last 4 months. He was quiet for a long moment. I keep expecting it to feel like losing, he said. All of it. The organization, the network, the structure. I keep expecting to feel like I gave something up. And she said, and I don't, he said. I keep looking for it, and it's not there. Good, she said. Amara Seseo Whitaker was born on a Thursday in April at 6:22 in the morning, after 14 hours of labor that Imani described afterward as the most physically violent experience of her life, and also, somehow, the clearest. Joon-hyuk was present for every minute of it. He was not, it turned out, a man who handled medical situations with his usual composure. He was a man who stood beside the bed with his jaw set in his hand where Imani put it, and said nothing except what she needed him to say, which was her name, when she said his. He asked the nurses questions in a tone that made at least one of them come back to check on the room twice. He did not leave to make calls, check his phone, or step out for air, and when the nurse asked him at hour 9 if he needed a break, he said no with a finality that closed the question. When Amara arrived, she was red and furious and small in a way that seemed incompatible with the 14 hours of effort she had required, and she cried immediately in a way that made the room feel lighter. And Joon-hyuk, who had not cried in front of another person since before the years had taught him, the cost of it, stood with his daughter in his arms for the first time and went completely, quietly apart. Not theatrical, not performed, just the thing happening on his face with no infrastructure left to contain it. Asauni watched him from the bed. She was exhausted in a way that went below language, the flat-bottom tired of someone who had completed something enormous, and she watched the man who had disappeared from a hotel room in August, standing in the April morning like his daughter and crying without apology. And she thought about the note on the night, You deserved better, and thought that he had spent the 9 months since then trying to prove it true. He came back to her side and put Amara carefully in her arms and sat on the edge of the bed and put his forehead down on the mattress beside her for a moment. Just that, just the weight of it released somewhere. Hi, Imani said to the baby against her chest. Amara stopped crying and blinked. Yeah, Imani said. It's a lot, I know. Her mother arrived that afternoon and held Amara for 45 minutes without putting her down and told Joon-hyuk, directly and without preamble, that she would be watching him, which he received with the seriousness it deserved, and said he understood. A sound on. Hiran came in the evening and held her granddaughter with a precision that suggested she was afraid of doing it wrong, and a tenderness that suggested she was going to do it anyway. Mujin stood in the doorway of the hospital room and looked at the small person in his wife's arms with the expression of a man doing a kind of accounting that had nothing to do with money. Nobody took pictures. Everyone remembered it anyway. Joon-hyuk proposed 6 weeks later, on a Saturday morning in May when Imani was feeding Amara in the living room of the apartment they had been sharing, not the guest apartment, the main one, because the guest apartment had become the nursery. And the practical reality of a newborn had resolved several theoretical questions about proximity, and he came in from the kitchen with coffee and set hers on the sides table and sat down across from her and said, without staging or jewelry or elaborate approach, "Marry me." She looked at him. "I don't have a ring yet," he said. "I wanted to ask before I went and chose something without knowing what you actually wanted." She looked at him sitting across from her in the May morning light, in sweatpants he'd had for a decade and a shirt she'd made him buy, because the one he had before was inappropriate for a man, who was now a parent, with coffee in his hand and Amara's feeding schedule on the refrigerator and the sound of the city outside and everything they'd built in the last 9 months visible from where she was sitting. Yes, she said. He let out a breath. But we're picking the ring together, she said. I know, he said. And it's going to be something I can wear while teaching 22 8-year-olds without worrying about losing a stone. Understood, he said. She looked back down at Amara, who had finished eating and was doing the specific focused staring of a 6-week-old encountering the fact that the world had shapes in it. She needs to be burped, Imani said. I'll do it, he said, and came over and lifted his daughter with the practical grip of a man who had spent 6 weeks learning something new and was still learning and intended to keep learning, and sat back down and put her against his shoulder and rubbed her back in the slow circles the nurse had showed him. And Amara made the small complaint of someone being asked to cooperate, and then settled. They were married in August, a year almost exactly from the hotel bar, in a ceremony that was small and private, and held in the garden at the waterfront estate, because Hiran had asked, and it was a good garden, and neither of them had a reason to say no. Imani's mother sat in the front row and did not cry until the moment Joon-hyuk said I will, and then cried without apology, which Imani had expected and found more steadying than she could easily explain. Mujin stood through the whole thing without his cane, which cost him something physical, and she noticed that and thought it counted for something. Amara slept through the ceremony in Hiran's arms and woke up at the exact moment the officiant finished, and made a sound that the people present chose to interpret as approval. Hayen's Pacific filed its restructuring documentation with the state of Washington in September. A sound-like release described it as a strategic pivot to development and investment in affordable housing, neighborhood infrastructure, and legitimate international trade, which was true and which contained a number of things that were harder to say in a press release. The profits in the first quarter were smaller than projected. The projections for the third year looked different. Jian reviewed everything and pronounced it clean. Cho called in October to say the Duwon prosecution had returned a verdict. 12 counts, federal, guilty across the board. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for January. Imani was in her classroom when Cho called. End of day. Kids just gone. The room in the particular aftermath state of a place where 22 people under 4 feet tall had spent 8 hours chairs slightly wrong, a crayon on the floor, Marcus Chen's library book on the corner of the desk where he'd left it again. She listened to Cho's summary and said, "Thank you," and hung up and sat at her desk in the quiet classroon for a few minutes before she started straightening chairs. She texted Joon-hyuk. Verdict came in, all counts. He responded in 30 seconds, I know. Ji-yeon called. Then, a minute later, are you okay? She looked at the text. She thought about the question. She thought about August and the hotel bar and the note and the pregnancy test on her bathroom floor and the school tour and the black SUV and the bakery and the stairwell and the hospital waiting room and the 48 hours and the elevator, the garden and the April morning and the May, Saturday and the August garden and the classroom around her right now with Marcus Chen's library book on the corner of the desk. Yes, she typed. Come get me from school. He was in the parking lot. When she walked out at 5:15, leaning against the car with Amara and the carrier on his chest, his hand on her back in the habitual way of a man for whom that weight had become structural, foundational, the thing he organized his posture around. Splitting. Imani stopped on the school steps and looked at them in the October late afternoon. Her husband and her daughter in the parking lot of her school, the building where she taught, the building that had been the location of threats and fire alarms and red paint on walls and was now simply the place where she went to work, because all of those other things were over, because they had ended, because she had made sure they ended. She came down the steps. He straightened when he saw her face. What? He said. Nothing, she said. You have a look. I'm allowed to have a look, she said. Amara, sensing a nearby voice she had catalogued as significant, turned her head toward Imani with the focused urgency of a 6-month-old conducting important research. Hi, baby, Imani said, and took her from the carrier, and Amara grabbed a fistful of Amazahaler and held on with the grip of someone who had no intention of letting go, which was, Imani had learned, her daughter's default position on most things. Joon-hyuk put his arm around Imani's shoulders. Not the gesture of a man making a point. The gesture of a man who had learned where things went and was putting them there. Verdict came in, he said. Yes, she said. How do you feel? She thought about it honestly. The October air was cold and clean, the parking lot emptying around them. The school building behind her, with its repaired administrative wing and its new signage, Haryun Pacific, had donated the renovation funds and removed their name from the plaque, which had been Joon-hyuk's specific instruction in her classroom on the second floor, where Marcus Chen's library book was still sitting on the corner of the desk. Like it's over, she said. Like I can stop counting exits. He looked at her. Like I can just be here, she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then yeah, he said. Me too. Amara tightened her grip on Imani's collar and said something that wasn't a word yet, but was clearly intended as one, and Imani shifted her weight to her hip and felt her husband's arm across her shoulders and the October air on her face, and the weight of her daughter, solid and real and present against her side. Behind them, the school's exterior lights came on the automatic timer. The building settling to its evening, and the parking lot went gold for a moment in the late light before the clouds came back across it. The ordinary, beautiful, brief, unremarkable gold of an October evening in Seattle, the kind of moment that didn't ask anything of the people standing in it except to notice it. Imani noticed it. The CO criminal organization had ended with one man who chose to end it, and the CO family's real accounting had begun not in a boardroom or a courtroom or a hospital, but in a classroom, in a small chair and a hotel bar in August, and a bathroom floor in September, and all the moments between then and now where two people had decided, again and again, that the truth was worth more than the alternative. Amara Seo Whitaker was 6 months old, and had her father's stillness and her mother's grip and no knowledge of any of the rest of it, which was exactly the point, which had always been exactly the point. The car was warm when they got in. The drive home was 20 minutes through ordinary Seattle traffic. Joon-hyuk kept his hand on the back of Imani's seat the way he did, and Amara fell asleep in her car seat with the speed of someone who had determined that the current situation was acceptable and she had other things to attend to. Imani watched the city go by. She was going to go back to work tomorrow and file her curriculum review next week and call her mother on Sunday and pick up the ring she'd had resized on Tuesday. And at some point have the conversation with Amara that was years away but coming, the honest conversation about the family she'd been born into and what it had cost and what it had become. And none of that was simple and none of it was finished, and all of it was real. That was enough. That had always been enough. She just hadn't known it until now.